Despite Uryu playing a major role in Bleach as one of Ichigo's closest friends, and the Vandenreich having a massive villainous presence in the back half of the series, when I think of a Quincy, I always come back round to one particular character, that of Uryu's cold and distant father, Ryuken. In my opinion, Ryuken truly embodies so many of the personality traits and the tropes that we've come to associate with the Quincy race, perhaps more so than any other character, his own son included. To that end, Ryuken is cold, he is distant, analytical, pragmatic, and an incredibly sharp dresser, and he does all of this while showing great disdain for just about everyone he meets. Ryuken's also a wonderful example of why I do this Forgotten Characters series, a great, interesting character with a fantastic design, not given anywhere near enough time to shine. And so in today's video, Bleach Forgotten Characters Episode 2, we're going to be taking a look at Uryu's father, the supposed Last Quincy, Ryuken Ishida. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. If you also enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it some love and give it a thumbs up, as it really does help get the video more exposure on YouTube, and it really helps support me, and it means other Bleach fans like yourselves get a chance to see it. And if you really enjoy what I do here, we also have a Patreon where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. Everyone on screen right now is a patron of this channel, and you guys have my total gratitude for letting me do what I love. Thank you all so very much for your support. So much like Tessai before him as the topic of the previous Forgotten Characters video, Ryuken is a perfect example of if you dive deep enough into Bleach's rich cast of characters, you will find someone at the secondary or even tertiary level who is totally fully formed, completely interesting, and like I said, just sidelined enormously throughout the series to the point where they really don't get a chance to deliver the goods, and that's a real big shame. It's a real side effect of Bleach having one of my favourite casts of characters in any kind of fictional series, is that so many of them do fly under the radar, and Ryuken is one such character. Ryuken is interesting, though, in that out of all of these characters, he is one of the only ones who could be considered truly neutral, in that he has no real footing in so many of the conflicts that come to pass in the series, which maybe explains why he doesn't show up so often, but there are also some conflicts that show up that he really should be involved in more than he is. And can I also just gush about Ryuken's design for a second? As I mentioned earlier, it's one of my favourites. I think it's a top tier design in the series. Kubo has this innate ability to totally effortlessly make even just normal humans look completely badass, and for the most part Ryuken does just wear normal human attire, and he looks so cool in it. I love the shock of white hair, the casual cigarette, the glasses that obscure his eyes, that kind of do just give off that totally aloof and distant air to him. And I think he just looks wonderful. He looks like a cooler version of Uryu in many ways, and I think Kubo should just be continuously praised for how great he can make even the simplest of designs look. But if we're to compare Ryuken to Tessai once more, the kind of trend of his appearances almost goes in reverse. Tessai appears considerably at the start of Bleach, only for his appearances to dwindle before eventually completely extinguishing by the final arc. Ryuken, on the other hand, takes a little while to appear in the series, but at least he gets a smattering of appearances right through to the very end. And to that end, his manga lifespan's actually a bit of a strange one. His first actual appearance is in chapter 124, but this is actually in a flashback, albeit a flashback that shows completely new material, which is why this counts as his first appearance. But his first appearance in the present day is not until 186, but then he lasts in the manga right the way through to 682. But take my word for it when I say he doesn't show up a lot in between those goalposts. And Ryuken is just such a fascinating character to me. In my opinion, he's Kubo's attempt at showing that side of the Quincy that's completely cold, completely analytical, almost robotic and statuesque, pushed to its maximum in a sense. When you look at Uryu, you see he had two father figures, one being Ryuken and the other being his grandfather Soken, and it seems like they're supposed to represent total polar opposites of what it means to be a Quincy, and both of those personalities would kind of come together to help form Uryu's. And so to that end, we may as well dive straight into Ryuken's role within the plot, because it's not extensive. As I said, his first appearance is chapter 124 in a flashback during an absolutely crucial moment of his son Uryu's development. Uryu has discovered Mayuri Kurotsuchi, a monster responsible for numerous atrocities against the Quincy clan, including his own grandfather Soken, who, as I mentioned, was a warm father figure to Uryu when he was growing up. And so Uryu has taken it upon himself to destroy Mayuri, even if it means sacrificing all of his Quincy powers. This whole fight is about what it means to be a Quincy in the face of great evil, it seems. What does it mean to have pride in being a Quincy? And you get both sides of that perspective with these two father figures. Again, they seem to be diametrically opposed. But his grandfather Soken is much more of a traditionalist. He's all about hope and helping people and really embracing what it means to be a Quincy. Whereas Ryuken is, again, the total opposite of that. He's disregarded everything to do with his Quincy heritage. He wants supposedly nothing to do with it because he is a man focused on business. You know, he is cold, clinical, ruthless, and to the point where Uryu even confronts him as a child and says, you know, why do you hate the Quincies so much? To the point where Ryuken turns around and says, I've no interest in them, you've no talent for them, but crucially, they don't make any money. And this is interesting. It's a potentially quite reductive motive for Ryuken to have when you see how his character becomes later on. He doesn't seem to be that business-focused, but I think what's important here is that Ryuken focusing on profit is a uniquely human element to both his character and what it means to be a Quincy. The Quincy don't have the luxury of being Shinigami. You know, it's a Shinigami's job to take down hollows to protect humans. They actually get paid to do that in the Soul Society. But that's not a Quincy's job. The Quincy don't have an official organization like that. You know, the Vandenreich is about as official as it gets for a Quincy, and that's a genocidal, racist empire that's been supposedly lost for 1,000 years. For a Quincy, this is a side gig. You know, it's just a thing they do to kind of try and help save humans from hollows, but it doesn't make any money. And Ryuken does have a job as a leading doctor in the foremost hospital of Karakura, and he has a son to take care of as well. And it's also hard to know if Katagiri, his wife, is actually still alive at this point in the story or not. Uryu does seem to be about the age Ichigo was when his mother died, so it's possible she is already dead at this point, but it's hard to say. And so Ryuken, at least here, it looks like his motive is fueled solely by selfish gain. And that's why he's turned his back on his heritage. However, we can also assume that if Katagiri is dead by this point, it's likely that he holds a great amount of lingering resentment towards the Quincy in general because of what happened to her, and that was why he turned his back on them. Also, as a side note, his hair is incorrectly coloured here twice. It's coloured in the anime, and that potentially makes a little more sense as they didn't have access to any official colourings at that point, but I think it's like a light brown or something. But then it's also coloured light brown in the official manga colouring as well, which is interesting because Kubo quite clearly wanted Ryuken to have white hair from even a young child through to where he is in the present day, because he has white hair in everything but the rain. So just a fun little note there that they somehow managed to get that wrong in the colouring as well. But after Uryu returns from the Soul Society, now weak and effectively powerless, is when Ryuken shows up in the present day. And this is an awesome, awesome moment. It's just a great moment in Bleach in general, and really it was talking about Isshin that made me want to talk about Ryuken, as Ryuken appears in the story around the same time as Isshin is revealed to be a Shinigami, and so the secrets of the fathers are beginning to be tantalizingly spilled. And this is a part of the story now where the scope of the fighting has grown to such an extent that even these bystanders who were originally in the shadows are now having to get involved. But I just want to say briefly that I love the way Uryu fights this Menos Grande that tries to kill him. Even though he is effectively powerless, we get to see Quincy's science and magic on full display here as he uses Jinto. He pulls these tubes and these wires out of small hidden compartments on his body, uses abilities like Heizen to tear off the Hollow's arm, and even wraps this wire around a tree. I love seeing that sort of resourcefulness. I love seeing him pushed to the brink like that and showing really everything a Quincy can do in that kind of situation. And again, you get the idea that compared to the vast military of the Soul Society who have their magical Zanpakuto to help them fight, a Quincy is a human at the end of the day and they have to get scrappy to fight Hollows. And I really liked seeing that. But as if to make a show of power and to make a real point, Ryuken arrives on the scene by annihilating the Menos Grande in almost a single hit, tearing off its massive tongue with a massive arrow blast. And Ryuken arrives on the scene putting down Uryu straight away, which is of course going to be a running kind of factor of this character. He basically walks onto the scene saying, "You've gotten clumsy, Uryu." And the impression you get of their relationship is that they are not on great terms. Clearly they're quite distant from one another, maybe haven't even seen each other for a little while. Uryu obviously calling his father by his first name as well. They are not close, and that is quite clear from the off. And Ryuken's design, again, is just so good here. And I love the fact that he is seemingly opposed within himself. He continually goes on about how he wishes he didn't have Quincy powers. He says, "Unfortunately, mine are not so easy to be rid of as yours." But he also takes a certain pride in being a Quincy. Like, he never lost that pride that he had as a young man. His tie is emblazoned with small crosses, and he even now bears the Quincy cross of his father, claiming himself to be the last Quincy. And this is a pretty big moment for Ryuken's character as he draws the Quincy cross from within his clothes and holds it up, again, seemingly with some kind of tainted pride, like he doesn't want this, but it is his, and he's going to carry this burden that his father has left him. And it seems again like he's also mocking Uryu here for having lost his powers, being like, "I'm the last Quincy, you know, I hold that." Ryuken Ishida holds that title. And obviously Uryu is like totally shocked, thinking his father didn't care about Quincies, he hated Quincies, didn't want anything to do with them. And Ryuken's kind of like, "Well, that's all true, but it doesn't mean I'm not a Quincy, you know, I have to have these powers, whether I like them or not." But Ryuken offers to help Uryu retrieve his lost powers, and I do question his motive here. Ryuken, you get the impression, is showing up on the scene in Uryu's life for potentially the first time properly in a short while anyway, and he just immediately offers to help his son get his powers back, because Uryu's clearly feeling, you know, kind of dejected, maybe even slightly useless or slightly worthless, even though he's trying his absolute best. He's the one who came away from Soul Society worst of all. So what is Ryuken's motive here? Although he despises Quincies, he wants to help Uryu become one again. And I do wonder if, again, we come back round to that issue of pride. Whether or not Ryuken likes Quincies is irrelevant. The Ishida family is supposed to be a family of Quincies, and he can't have his son running around fighting Hollows like some scrappy mutt. It could be something like that, or it could even be that he does actually hold some kind of affectionate feelings towards his child. I think that is probably the case. He's not quite as cold and callous and heartless as he appears on the surface. He probably laments seeing Uryu so weak from both a pride perspective, but also the fact that he does care about him, and he wants to help him regain that power. Ryuken offers to restore Uryu's Quincy powers, but with an ultimatum attached, and that is that he cannot associate himself with Shinigami ever again. And this is obviously a pretty big deal, but at the end of the day, it's quite a flimsy ultimatum, and Ryuken must have known that Uryu wasn't going to keep it, and yet he still trains him anyway. So what it comes down to is, I think Ryuken does an awful lot of keeping up appearances. Like, he definitely does harbour some ill will towards Isshin because of their shared past, because of what happened to Masaki, as we'll get into later on. But at the same time, I think the actual truth of this character is that most of that is a front, and the reality is that he does care for Uryu, he does care even for Uryu's friends, and he does actually have some semblance of friendship with Isshin after everything they've been through. Once again, we will get to Everything But the Rain, but clearly Ryuken's current attitude conflicts greatly with how he was as a young man. As a teenager, he cared immensely about continuing the Quincy line, ensuring the Ishida Quincy line remained pure, and just being all focused in on the future of the Quincy, to the point where he was even going to enter into a marriage he wasn't entirely sure the participants wanted, because it would continue that Quincy line. And after what became of both Masaki and his future wife Katagiri because of Arc, it's not hard to see that he would eventually seal himself away from the Quincy race, but little mementos, like his tie for instance, do continue to act as clues towards his true nature. So Uryu undergoes some very intense training with Ryuken in an underground training chamber beneath the hospital, and you kind of wonder why Ryuken has this chamber if he doesn't like being a Quincy, if he's not interested in even having his powers. Maybe he comes down here to train secretly, maybe it was built for the purpose of getting Uryu his powers back, it's hard to say. It is interesting that characters like Urahara and Isshin actually know where it is, so I wonder if maybe it's been here for an awfully long time. But regardless, the training session is brutal, it is tough on Uryu as Ryuken pushes him as far as he can go. Ryuken's power is really teased here, you get to see him one hand in his pockets, the other hand just blasting a volley of arrows. Almost like a rapid-fire gun, but with only one hand, shows you the kind of level of expertise he actually has. Uryu does manage to get the drop on him right at the end of the training session, and he uses grits to try and basically immobilize him rather than actually injure him, probably out of some kind of latent sentimental feelings towards his father, but Ryuken chastises him for it, burns through the trap with a massive arrow, and blasts Uryu in the heart. And I absolutely love the end of this training session. I think it's really, really cool. Uryu crashes to the ground, this kind of Quincy emblem now burned into his chest, and Ryuken says that the only way to retrieve your Quincy powers that were lost is to push your body and your mind to the absolute brink and then be shot. I think it's something like 19 millimeters to the left of the heart's sinoatrial node or something like that, for whatever reason, to jumpstart your Quincy powers again. And that's really kind of cool, and it's cool that Uryu gets his powers back thanks to his father. And this is what I mean when I say Ryuken doesn't do an awful lot in the series, but the actions he does do are far-reaching. You know, he helps Uryu retrieve his powers much in the same way as Isshin would help his son in the future. And also he helps create the item that would destroy the big bad at the very end of the series. So Ryuken doesn't do a lot, but what he does do has a big rippling effect. It's interesting as well that for a race that is depicted as being so kind of callous and almost heartless, very sterile and clinical in the way they do things, that so much of what makes a Quincy, what can both make and break a Quincy, is to do with the heart. You know, Ryuken revitalizes, rejuvenates Uryu's Quincy powers by blasting him in the heart, and many Quincy are killed by a blood clot forming in the heart thanks to the ability of their king, Arc. So it's quite interesting that the heart plays such a vital role in a race that is so often considered to barely have one. And I do adore the end of this training session. This is one of my favourite Ryuken scenes in the series, where he kind of looks down at Uryu, who is unconscious at this point, and he says, you know, you should have attacked me with Heizen instead of grits. You could have actually wounded me, but you chose not to. You make me sick, but maybe I'll let it slide this time. And I think that's really, I love that panel. Brilliant use of negative space, of Ryuken looking down at his son. And clearly there is something there. Like, they don't utterly hate each other, that Ryuken does care for him a bit, and he's maybe even a bit proud that Uryu was able to go through with the training and has now become a Quincy once more. After Uryu gets his powers back, it seems like they continue training for a little bit longer, which makes a lot of sense, but during a period of time, Ryuken slips out for a smoke break. Urahara sneaks in and whisks Uryu away, and then Ryuken, I guess, comes back in, although it seems like a lot of time has passed since then, and sees a note left behind by his son, which he doesn't seem overly happy about, but also not too surprised to see either. The note, I'm presuming, basically thanks Ryuken for helping Uryu restore his powers, but he chooses not to read it. And then Isshin arrives on the scene for another very nice little conversation between these two. And it's interesting, again, like I mentioned, Isshin knows where this place is, so presumably this training center is pretty old. But Ryuken calls Isshin Kurosaki, which Isshin is surprised about, and perhaps that is Ryuken's way of signifying that he has, let Masaki go. He's finally willing to call Isshin by her surname, as we know that's obviously not his surname. Presumably he was calling him Shiba up until now, or maybe just Isshin, I guess. But I'm guessing that is what that's supposed to symbolise, is that Ryuken has finally accepted that he can call him by her surname, thanks, due to their combined past. Maybe it was difficult for him. And Ryuken plays coy, but it definitely seems as though he allowed Uryu to leave to assist his friends, much as Isshin speculates. And then interestingly, Isshin actually sits down as opposed to leaving, so it seems like maybe they're going to have some kind of a catch-up after this scene ends. And unfortunately for Ryuken, he's not seen now for nearly 20 volumes of the series, which is absolutely insane. And I just want to go briefly to one of the most disappointing cliffhanger resolutions in the series for me personally, which is in the fake Karakura Town arc. We've talked about this before on the channel, but the mysterious foot that appeared to stop Aizen when he was in the real Karakura Town. So many theories were being flung about. Is this finally the Zero Division stepping in? Is it Tessai, as we mentioned last time? But one of the absolute biggest ones was maybe this is Ryuken showing up, as he must be in Karakura, and there's no way he's unconscious. Tessai at least makes some sense in that he's probably protecting Jinta and Uryu, but Ryuken should be there. And I'm also not accepting the idea that he's not getting involved in this conflict, because Karakura Town is at risk, which means he is at risk. He probably would have been killed by Aizen, and yet apparently he doesn't get involved. So he's just clearly chilling somewhere, which does feel like a big missed opportunity to see him in action. Ryuken's next scene, however, in the Lost Agent arc, and this is a really interesting appearance for this character. Not only do we get to see him actively doing his job as a doctor in the biggest hospital of Karakura Town, where he is now saving his son who was attacked by Ginjo and Tsukishima, but he also calls up Ichigo and Orihime because he obviously values their friendship with Uryu to some degree, and he thinks they should be actively sharing information between them because Ryuken clearly understands that they work best as a team. But as we've said before, the Lost Agent arc is all about these guys being totally dysfunctional as friends. Uryu's pride, but also the fact that he's unclear on the situation means he doesn't share anything with these guys at all, and it's instead left up to Ryuken to dish out the details. It is also kind of funny, though, that Ryuken knows what buttons to press to annoy Uryu, and so his constant, barbs and the fact that he jabs him all the time verbally must be making the situation a lot worse and probably pushing Uryu to not say anything at all. But Ryuken understands that they are all allies at the end of the day, and it's also just kind of weird and alien to see him acting in definitely more of a fatherly way than he ever did in the Arrancar arc, where, he's basically saying to Ichigo, you need to get home or your dad's going to throw a fit at me and I'll drive Orihime home because, it's not safe. That's just it's just strange to see, but I like it because he comes across as more mature, almost like he is taking his role as a father a little more seriously. But it's also nice here that he drops our first hints as to the nature of the villains of this arc when he tells Orihime that he thinks they are human and that their Reiatsu is like nothing he's ever seen before, and he speculates it might be closer to that of Chad and Orihime's. It's also really funny to me as well that he drops this, bombshell on Orihime that, you might be attacked next. And then he's like, all right, we'll see you. I'm going to drive you home now. I'm going to drive you home back to your apartment where you'll be on your own. But don't worry, you might be attacked next. I always thought that was kind of funny, but it's a nice scene nonetheless. And then we get to the 1,000-year Blood War arc. And this is obviously absolutely the most frustrating part of this character. For an arc about the Quincies, about Quincy history, about bringing the Quincy Shinigami conflict into the modern day, Ryuken should have had such an active role in this. There's no reason why he shouldn't. The main villain killed his wife, and I like that Ryuken was working in the behind the scenes to eventually create something that would kill Yhwach, but that was also way before even Bleach's present day story began. So at the very start, it's just kind of strange to envision what kind of role Ryuken had in this story. Because it doesn't seem like he's working with Urahara, it doesn't seem like he and Isshin are really conversing. And it doesn't really seem like he's even spoken to his son either, which is strange. So for me, I think it would have made an awful lot of sense and gone a really long way to have Uryu and Ryuken have some kind of cryptic discussion before Uryu was revealed to be with the Vandenreich. I think that really should have happened, and I think Ryuken could have dropped some very early hints about the still silver arrow. Uryu could have dropped some kind of tease about his true nature. Because as I mentioned in my video about Uryu's role in this arc, no one really bought that Uryu was a bad guy from the off, and it seems like the only reason Kubo wouldn't have shown Uryu consulting anybody prior to his supposed defection is because he wanted us to think that maybe he had. Maybe he had actually turned, so it's very strange that Ryuken must be aware of the fact that Vandenreich is back, must be aware of the fact Yhwach is back, and doesn't seem to do anything until right at the very end of the battles. So that's always been kind of weird to me, but we'll get into that. Kubo does, however, dive really deep into Ryuken's backstory and the history of the Ishida family, which, to be honest, I did love. And everything But the Rain is done exceptionally well. So a small detail about Everything But the Rain is that Soken Ishida is clearly a pretty bad father, and that kind of does change your perspective of the character as he appears in the Soul Society arc, and it also explains a lot about his relationship with Ryuken. Ryuken is a teenager in this mini arc, kind of, a young man at this point, and almost like the man of the house, because his father seemingly is never around, and this is something that Ryuken's mother, Uryu's grandmother, is actively annoyed about, so clearly this happens a lot. But she mentions that Soken is currently at Funtfeld, I believe, 5th Field, which is just basically apparently a training facility, which we never get to see, unfortunately. I almost wonder if, 5th Field is maybe the name of the training facility underneath the hospital, if it's been there that long. It's kind of hard to say. But Soken clearly cared more about, increasing his own powers as a Quincy than he really did spending time with his family. And that, like I said, explains an awful lot about the kind of earliest appearance of Ryuken, in that he doesn't really approve of his father, doesn't approve of Uryu hanging around him, and maybe that's another layer of why he had that motivation to begin with. He thinks that Soken really prioritized being a Quincy over even his own family, and that's not something Ryuken wanted to replicate. And it is kind of interesting, because it does kind of seem like, not that being a Quincy is something you should grow out of, but that is everything that Soken was, even by the time he was an old man. And maybe he really sacrificed his family for that, and perhaps he was trying to make amends by spending a lot of time with his grandson, but Ryuken wasn't having it because of the bad relationship they had in the past. Who knows? I'm just speculating, but feels to me like that might make sense. But I do also want to talk briefly about Soken now, and just how old this character actually is. And it makes me wonder, this whole story arc makes me wonder just how much these particular Quincy in the almost modern day knew about the Vandenreich and Yhwach. We find out in chapter 674, when Ryuken and Isshin arrive at Varvelt, that Soken had a Gate of the Sun key. That's how they access it. Ryuken says that he's amazed that this decades-old pass still lets them in, and Isshin says, yeah, we should be grateful that your old man stole one but just before he was banished. That tells you right then and there that Soken was a member of the Vandenreich. There's no other way around it. That's why he has a key to the Gate of the Sun. But that also implies that Soken is about 1,000 years old, if not older than that. And so things do start getting a bit weird here, but I also think I have an explanation for how this all makes sense. But there are a few key questions here before we get into that as well. Is Soken over 1,000 years old? Does the Vandenreich maybe exist in some form in the human world? And why was Soken banished in the first place? So the first question about Soken's age, yes, I think he probably is over 1,000 years old. 2, no, I don't think the Vandenreich did exist in any form in the human world whatsoever. And 3, why was Soken banished? It seems to me like Soken probably disagreed with the Vandenreich's kind of genocidal schemes, the schemes of their leader, and also we know, according to Kirge Opie, that Soken didn't really agree with the Vandenreich's evolution, with moving away from the more primitive bow and arrow to using the Schrift. I assume he wasn't a big fan of that either, because it is kind of cultish. It's very cultish, very weird. And it does kind of give you the impression of these extremists almost doing whatever they can to become powerful enough to exact revenge later on. So my guess is Soken was part of that original Vandenreich army, maybe even a Sternritter who attacked the Soul Society 1,000 years ago. He was part of the survivors who then hid in the shadows, and just looking at the ages of Ugram and Basby, we can assume pretty handily that these guys don't really age in the shadows at all, because now they're aging on Soul Society time. So Soken spends plenty of time there, doesn't really age that much, and is then banished from the Shadow Realm, stealing one of the Gate of the Sun keys as he does, and lives out exile in the human world. And it's here that he, met Uryu's grandmother, and I guess began to age normally, which is why he's a relatively old-ish man by the time we see him with Uryu in their flashbacks. Pretty much that is my best guess as to what is going on here with Soken Ishida. So Ryuken reveals as a teenager that he's actually being set up to marry Masaki, who is the last of the Kurosaki pure-blood Quincy line, and they're doing this union to continue the Quincy bloodline, which, this whole idea of blood purity and making sure the line exists is obviously a little bit strange, but when you look at it from their perspective, their race has been nearly completely obliterated by the Shinigami 200 years prior to the main storyline. They're doing everything they can to kind of keep themselves alive. But obviously, Ryuken kind of claims to really care about this whole pure blood ideology, this lineage that he's got going on, the future of the Quincy line and the Quincy clan. But we also meet Katagiri, who is a half-blood or Gemished Quincy, the half-blood Quincies are the ones the pure-bloods send out into battle because they're more expendable in their eyes. And Katagiri kind of sees through Ryuken's, not really a facade, but almost like he's tricking himself into believing that he cares more about this sort of thing. She says that, despite the rules and the laws and the traditions of the Quincy that would force you into a marriage like this, you are a person of kindness who thinks that love should be a part of a Quincy marriage, even though it traditionally hasn't really ever been. And maybe that's a big part of the kind of clash that Soken and Uryu's grandmother have, is that they were a, union of the Quincy and not really, not really ever in love. But Ryuken, so already here, is shown to be, on the surface, trying to project Quincy values, but maybe not really actually that into them. It is a shame we don't get to see Ryuken and Katagiri fight, because they do look awesome, kind of dressed up in their Quincy outfits that they put on in Everything But the Rain, but regardless, Ryuken again shows his disdain for the rules here by trying to cover up that Masaki was bitten by a hollow, despite the devastating effects that will have on their whole Quincy family tree. However, Katagiri goes behind his back and tells Ryuken's mother the truth about Masaki, which leads to Masaki being scolded. And this is interesting because Katagiri, I think, didn't do this out of spite or out of malice, but because she really believed that Ryuken wanted the Quincy family line to continue, that she really believed that in his heart of hearts, Ryuken was going to go through with this marriage even though he didn't want to, because that's the kind of person he was, and that she could show him her loyalty to the Quincy lineage, to the Quincy family line, by basically giving Masaki up. But Masaki obviously collapses, the hollow hole starts to form, and there's another interesting part here where Ryuken's mother is shown to have been attacked by a hollow. There's the bruise or the scarring on her leg, and that would have obviously tainted her in the eyes of the Quincy. So again, I wonder if maybe that is why Soken is so distant from her, because again, he's maybe not that nice a person. It's hard to say. But Ryuken now meets Urahara and Isshin in their fated meeting, and Ryuken really blames Isshin for what's happening to Masaki, but crucially, he also blames himself as well. Inside, he's going over and over the fact that I should have been there, I should have stopped her from leaving, this is all my fault, and maybe that is regret that he harbours for a very long time moving forwards. But Urahara basically breaks it down to them how they can save her life, and Ryuken quickly deduces that Isshin is the one who's going to have to make the sacrifice. And this is obviously Ryuken's kind of more calculating and pragmatic side coming out, because he really just weighs up the situation in terms of advantages and disadvantages, basically saying there's no way Isshin would ever go through with this, because it's just disadvantages for him, basically. Not really taking into account the way a Shiba or a Kurosaki would actually act. So when Ryuken is truly taken aback by the fact that Isshin will just do it anyway because, you know, he kind of owes her, and he feels if he didn't help her out when she needed it, you know, he'd never be able to look at himself the same way again. The fact that that kind of Isshin's response flies in the face of logic shows you the difference between Masaki and Ryuken, Isshin and Ryuken, and crucially the Kurosakis and the Ishidas. So although Ryuken probably does harbour lingering resentment towards Isshin, I also do wonder if he was grateful as well, because it does seem like Ryuken cares genuinely greatly about Masaki. Whether he was actually in love with her or not, actually want to marry her, I'm not entirely sure, but he definitely does seem to care about her and really feels the weight of what happens to her on his shoulders. So you have to assume he was a bit grateful towards Isshin for stepping up to save her. But the final scene of Ryuken in Everything But the Rain is another of my absolute favourites for this character. He leaves Urahara's shop dejected, you know, feeling like he can no longer protect the Quincy race. If he couldn't protect Masaki, he can't do anything. And the rain is pouring on him. He looks like a broken man. He's sodden. And then who should kind of come and find him in his moment of need but Katagiri? You know, she's there with an umbrella, and she basically says, you know, I'm not going to hear this. I don't want you to be sad. I said to you that I would dedicate my life to you from the moment I laid eyes on you, from the moment we first met, and I will continue to do that now. And really what this is a roundabout way of Katagiri explaining her feelings to Ryuken. I think Ryuken realises that she has always been there for him, and they decide to go back to the house together. It's a lovely, lovely scene that really encapsulates Ryuken's character arc in Everything But the Rain so very well. And later we discover that Ryuken basically was the one who decided Masaki should leave the Ishida household, the official line being that she is tainted now, but Isshin speculates, probably correctly, that it was a lot easier for Ryuken to move on with Masaki gone. And so clearly it took a long time for Ryuken to accept the fact that maybe Isshin and Masaki got married. It took him a long time to actually call Isshin Kurosaki. We then do finally get to see a present-day version of Ryuken in the final arc, in one of my favourite shots of this character in the entire series. I think it's just so very well done, but basically Isshin reveals that around the same time Masaki lost her powers, Ryuken's wife, Katagiri, collapsed and then eventually died. And the reason for this was because Yhwach deemed her unclean, and he stole her powers in an effort to retrieve his own. And because Katagiri was already slightly sickly, that finished her off, basically. And there's that lovely shot of Ryuken looking out of his office window at the moon, at the rain, with the photo of Katagiri on the desk behind him. And you can only imagine what's going through his head at this point in time. Like I said, he must be aware that Yhwach has returned. So you kind of have to wonder what is going through his head. And I'm thinking Ryuken is probably thinking about that moment with Katagiri, when she kind of expressed her feelings for him in the rain as it's raining at the moment. He's thinking about what happened to her the day she died and that he left that hole in their family. And he's probably also thinking about the autopsy he performed on her and the silver blood clot he found. And it's difficult to know if he's actually fashioned the still silver arrowhead or not yet. Maybe he made it the moment he found the blood clot, or maybe he waited until Yhwach came back to make it. I think it was great that we got to see him searching for this blood clot, but I really wish we had also seen him forge the arrow. I think that would have been really cool, like a really powerful moment, but unfortunately we don't get that. But instead, I'm guessing Ryuken is thinking about what his son is currently doing, the risks Uryu is taking, and the fact that the Ishida family is potentially close to finally avenging Katagiri. And much later, Ryuken does get a chance to exact that revenge, and you do get a nice flashback of Uryu basically talking to Ichigo about not wanting to become a doctor because of something traumatic he saw his father doing as a young boy, and that was him continually autopsying on his wife's dead body. Now, we would eventually find out that this was for a good reason, but for Uryu, this was a horrible thing to witness, and he didn't understand what his father was doing, and it made him not want to become a doctor. But at the end of the series, Uryu has become a doctor, clearly because he realised what his father was doing was something good in the end. And so finally, Ryuken arrives at Varvelt with Isshin right at the very end of the series, and I know we all hoped that they would fight. It really felt like they were going to. It seemed like almost the perfect setup. I was certain that Ryuken was going to intervene in the fight between Uryu and Hashwolf just as Uryu was about to be killed, but it doesn't happen. Hashwolf is taken out by Yhwach, and then Ryuken arrives at the battle scene to give Uryu the still silver arrowhead. Now, the still silver arrow is very controversial, and I want to make a video on it in its entirety at some other point, but I will say, I really love this moment. I wish there had been more build-up. I would have loved to have seen Ryuken make the arrow at some point, have a conversation with Uryu prior to this, but I actually think this does work quite nicely. I think this whole scene is just done so very well, and it feels like a culmination of their relationship. I think Ryuken deciding that Uryu should be the one to fire the arrow is a really big moment for him. Katagiri was his wife, and obviously he feels awful about what happened and he wants revenge, but in a way, he's done his part by finding the blood clot and forging the arrow. But Katagiri was also Uryu's mother, and so Ryuken clearly feels that he can give this to his son to get revenge for her as well, so both members of the family are able to do something that, culminates in the downfall of this monstrous Quincy Allfather. It is a bit of a shame that Isshin just sort of tags along at this point, but at the same time, he is there to witness the still silver arrow being passed along, and the results of Ryuken's work, and in a sense, by being there, he's able to honour Masaki's life. And of course, Ryuken wearing his Quincy outfit here for the first time since, presumably, the end of Everything But the Rain is very significant as well, as he must expect this to be the end of Yhwach. It's a big deal. He's honouring Katagiri by wearing this outfit, but also it reinforces the idea that he turned his back on the Quincy after what happened to her, and now that he's expecting her killer to finally be brought to justice, he's comfortable wearing this outfit again. And so I'd be really interested actually in seeing Ryuken in the future of Bleach if he has actually fully embraced the mantle of being a Quincy once more. And of course, the reason I do really like the still silver arrow at the end of the day is it's a message, not just from the Ishida family who are left with a huge hole in their heart, but a message from all Quincy who have been ruthlessly used by their supposed father. One thing that makes me think Ryuken crafted the arrowhead perhaps earlier than the Thousand Year Blood War is that Ryuken tells Uryu that it was Soken who explained to him the still silver arrow, essentially, the concept of still silver that clogs the heart and causes a Quincy to die after Auswählen. So maybe that was a coming together of father and son in revenge for Uryu's mother, but also I wonder if Uryu's grandmother was maybe killed by Auswählen as well, because she was tainted after being attacked by a hollow. So all of the Ishida men maybe had some stake in this, and it was Soken who told Ryuken about this whole thing, Ryuken who forged the arrowhead, and Uryu who fired it. Alright, but that's it for this episode of Bleach Forgotten Characters. This was longer than I was expecting. It's quite extensive. Maybe Ryuken does a little more than I gave him credit for, but I don't think that's the case. I think Ryuken's just a very interesting character with an awful lot of baggage, and I'm really happy to have finally been able to talk about him in some detail. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Let me know in the comments below what's your favourite Ryuken moment in the series. Do you wish you'd seen more of this character, and would you have liked to have seen him intervene in the battle against Hashwolf? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.